thank you very much for coming here, and I acknowledge the land on which we meet is held, never surrendered, never ceded, and the Indigenous people here we acknowledge their role, and we hope we'll do better next time. Now, I think this is a great pleasure to introduce Professor Zan, who was a PhD student of mine and has a long and distinguished career, which is suggested but only hinted at by the CVs circulated. I want to say that it was a great pleasure to supervise Dr. Zan, and although there's one disturbing thing that I'm finding, more and more of those that I taught are now retiring.
Really?
Yes, and Toomey reminded me that I'd taught her at Melbourne Law School, and she's retired. So
yeah. She's retired early though.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Graham Orr, and the other people appointed Graham Orr, who was appointed, we gave him his first academic job.
He's retired.
He's on a retirement path. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. But, anyway, so the thing is that in reminder of my galloping age that I do, and he was a wonderful student. And the other thing is that he has direct experience of, and much to say about an issue that I have great interest in and affinity for, coup d'etat. I hate him. Plenty of other people hate him, and the question is what you do about them. And it's a delight to find that Professor Zan shares a similar interest, and I look forward to hearing what he has to say on comparing Burmese coups in 1962, 1988 and 2021, and the perspectives of HLA Hart, whom we all knew, but Estra, which I'm not familiar with.
Yes.
So please,
thank you.
Present.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for your kind introduction. Yes, basically, I read several months ago that your book on something on coup d'etat, I don't know the exact title, will be published sometime in November 2023.
Dare to call it treason is the name.
Pardon?
It's called Dare to Call It Treason.
Oh, dare to call it treason.
Dare to, that's from a 16th century writer who said, treason never prospers, what's the reason? Or when treason prospers, none dare to call it treason.
I see. Yeah,
Please.
Right. Yes, I remember that quote. Thank you for that introduction, and I look forward to. I hope I can get a review copy or something like that when it comes on. I have written my most recent review article was on Ban Ki-moon's memoirs, and Hilary kindly mentioned that going back almost 30 years, we have connections, phone, email, and in person a few times, and he said that we have discussed about U Thant, the Burmese third Secretary General of the United Nations. So I did not review his book, but I reviewed Boutros Ghali memoirs, Unvanquished, a US-UN saga, and Ban Ki-moon's book, Resolve, United Nations, something about memoirs. Okay, thank you again for that. This is about not merely Burmese coup, but a few other things will be discussed with other takeover, but only slightly. How do I go to the next slide? Shift or yes, yeah. So it is my impression or my choice of what is of external validity is normally in international law, whenever a new government come into power, ordinarily, constitutionally, democratically, in the general sense of the word, then there is no need for other states or other governments to recognize or not recognize. When Scott Morrison was defeated and Anthony Albanese can't do, but no other country needs to officially recognize or not recognize statements regarding things. Same with Biden, even Obama to Trump takeover, my fear is that if I may sidetrack a bit,
Mhm.
Trump may repeat, notwithstanding all the problems. Well, it may be an advantage for him rather than for problem. May become the first president since Grover Cleveland. After a 4-year hiatus, he became president. None of them, like Hillary Clinton, like other persons who were defeated one time, George H.W. Bush, President Carter, they never come back. None since Grover Cleveland. So he may be a second Grover Cleveland. That is my fear. But never mind. Sorry, as usual, I sidetrack.
No, that's fine.
Sidetrack. But basically, the regime before Estrada, I think I can give one example. The change of regime from the Tsar regime to the Leninist regime in 1970. From what I remember, by 1921, Great Britain has already recognized the Leninist regime, Bolshevik regime. And that can be found in the case from memory, Luther versus Sargor case, whether there is a difference in terms of commercial relations, in terms of validity of bank takeovers, etc. Whether Britain recognized the new revolutionary government. It is not through a democratic election. It is not through the Tsarist constitution, so to speak, that Lenin came into power. It's a revolutionary regime. So basically, from my recall, Britain recognized in 1921, the United States recognized the Soviet regime only after Lenin's death and Stalin's tenure in 1932, when President Franklin Roosevelt took over. So this is the issue with fairly recognition or non-recognition. But the same thing would happen when Chinese Mao Zedong took over in 1 October 1949, claiming or declaring in Tiananmen Square that the Chinese people had stood up. So Burma recognizes the new regime within weeks, I think. The then Burmese ambassador to China, U Mintang, was transferred from Nanjing to Peking, as it then called Beijing, and he became the 3rd Chief Justice of independent Burma. First name is similar, Myint, last name is Teng, and he was arrested on the coup of 2 March 1962 and spent 6 years in detention without charge, trial, but luckily Ne Win issued a statement saying that on 30th March 1962, he issued a decree that these persons, the Supreme and High Courts of Burma, were abolished effective 31 March, 12 noon, 31 March 1962. Very exact. Some of the orders will say this order will come into effect immediately. And the broadcaster at the radio station had to open literally 30 seconds, a sealed envelope, 30 seconds before the live broadcast on radio and read. And most of the time it says this order shall come into effect immediately. But the 30th March 1962 order said that from noon the next day, 31, I found it in the Burmese newspaper, retrieving it. So that is the relationship. But now, this man, I retrieve it from the internet, Estrada is in Mexico, Mexican foreign minister. And he announced in 1930 that Mexico would not issue, yes, the photo, that's the photo, funny photo I have, will not, I hope it is the correct photo, will not issue statements of recognition or non-recognition. When there is a new revolutionary government changeover, like in the example of prior to Estrada, 1917, Leninist takeover from the Tsarist regime. In fact, I used to teach, because I teach jurisprudence for 10 years at Multimedia University, and I used to explain that, and some Marxists or Sovietists may disagree, the 1949 Chinese Revolution was a revolution because they have to fought for 10 years, including the 6,000-mile long march the Mao Zedong's troops against Chiang Kai-shek, basically. So it was a revolution. But the 1917 November, which they still, even under Putin, is still glorified as the Great October Socialist Revolution, is a coup d'etat, in a sense. Because it is a coup d'etat, because Lenin was in Switzerland. He went to the library to do some work. I read an biography of Lenin that, in fact, I read two biographies, Robert Payne and the other one more recently. I can't remember the author, Victor something Strachan. He was in the library in Geneva, and we came back for lunch. His wife told him that the day before, the Tsar has to abdicate because of the demonstration. He was like Khomeini. How should I put it? He hijacked the revolution, and he went in a sealed compartment car by the German right-wing German regime to enter the Soviet Union. He was strip searched, I read, at the border. He and his wife also were strip searched by various, but basically the British government said allow them in. So he hijacked the revolution, and it was a coalition government between Menshevik and Bolshevik, and he took over from the Menshevik, and it was very lucky. I won't go through them. It was not a revolution. The revolution occurred earlier, and the coalition government, so to speak, between the Menshevik and the Bolshevik took over, and it was a coup, in a sense, against the Menshevik. So who will recognize that? Basically, the Soviet Union, you can say a new state, but also a new regime, was recognized by Britain as early as 1921, but as I said, United States recognized only in 1932. But basically, because of this issue, Estrada announced that we will not issue statements, Mexico will not issue statements of recognition or non-recognition. When the revolutionary regime took over, we will not issue either statement. In a sense, he implied that you will have to decide. You have to decide by yourself from how we deal with the new regime, whether we recognize or not. I think that is the implied statement in that regard. But apparently, even from what I do on online research, so to speak, now I don't know what, in our time when I wrote my master's thesis, there is no such thing as internet. The best is mainly the law library and occasionally the Chifley library. I don't even go to the Menzies library in ANU. Basically, when I wrote my introductory statement under Charles for PhD, then I can refer to online, but I've cited them fully, online sources in my introductory statement, basically. But now with AI, I don't know how, we have this turn it in, check-in form, but I don't know how AI will, even in effect, the just a mood. That's what they will try to catch, whether the originality or all copied or what. I don't know what is happening. But anyway, even Mexico, from what I read, suspended this issue when there was a coup in Venezuela or attempted coup, right-wing coup against a left-wing government in Venezuela. So basically, they abandoned or suspended the doctrine of not issuing formal statement or of recognition or non-recognition of the new regime. So that is what happened in that regard. Yes, they do not fully apply the Estrada doctrine because there was a crisis within the neighboring country of Venezuela. So that was the situation. Now, as far as the new regime is concerned, first, I think in 2002 or 3, there was an attempted right-wing coup against the left-wing governor of the late Hugo Chavez. He went to the Union General Assembly and said that was time the second Bush Jr. This hall smells of sulfur because apparently Bush was giving the speech the day before him or maybe on the same day as him. He said it means that the devil was here. Yeah. But he was criticized, but President grossly overrated in my view. Ronald Reagan called the Nicaraguan now still the regime leader. What is his name? Oh, yes, Ortega, yes. Ortega as the devil in sunglasses. So, but Salva was criticized. Chavez was criticized. Reagan, for most of the American public, it's untouchable. Untouchable. Right. So, when the election was cheated, as in Burma, now, the army alleged that there was a gross, that's what they say, election wrongs. That's why they have to take over. I won't go through the details, and that's the, but here also, a BBC report states that the Mr. Guaido, the Venezuelan opposition leader, was recognized by 50 countries. So this is suspension of the Estrada doctrine. If the news report is true, probably it is because of the BBC. Yeah. Because Estrada doctrine means you don't formally recognize or not recognize. Then they said that we will not recognize. And Venezuela says that he was a legitimate leader, and Nicolas Maduro, the opposition, and Nicolas Maduro is the de facto leader, and which was in control, most of the control of Venezuela, and Guaido as the legitimate leader. But it comes to nothing. It comes to nothing effectively, at least internally within Venezuela. So that's what I said. They have not adopted the doctrine, Estrada, so-called Estrada doctrine, at least in this case. So that's why I wrote in my summary that it is a checkered, not consistent anyway, practice. Now, Hans Kelsen would be more familiar than Estrada for jurisprudence, I think. So even though I dislike, sort of dislike Kelsen's view, he is right. At least in Burma, he is right. The effectiveness is the most major criteria, if not almost sole criteria of recognition. Whether you recognize or not, the Soviet Union and the Leninist-Stalinist regime existed. And I discussed with my own supervisor, Nicholas Chisman. He wrote on Burmese law and order, and he had more access to, surprisingly, he had access to 50, 60 decisions, all written in Burmese of various courts relating the topic, and he read Burmese. So I don't have access to that. And he even reproduced about 5 or 6 places in footnotes in Burmese language. I have to correct in one place. I won't go through his translation, because none of these supervisors, including Hilary Charlesworth, can read Burmese, but he did reproduce. He did reproduce a few statements in the footnotes in the original Burmese script. That's why I was able to check with him. And basically, I told Nicholas Chessman, when I met him briefly a few days ago, that it is wrong to say that the 2021 Burmese coup is an attempted coup. Some of them wrote attempted coup. He said, right, you are right in terms of Kelsen. He didn't mention Kelsen. In terms of de facto, but in terms of legitimacy, he seems to argue that it is an attempted coup. It is a super successful coup, very successful coup. It is not an attempted coup. Attempted coup is, again, the right-wing attempted overthrow of Chavez in 2003. That's an attempted coup. The 1965, 30th September 1965 in Indonesia, the so-called communist coup was crushed within a day by Suharto, and some say it is a makeup. It's not really even a coup by the communists, alleged communists. So that's an attempted coup. But Burma is not an attempted coup. But Nick Cheeseman have several. You said that this is in terms of de facto or de jure international law, but in terms of legitimacy, he said it is correct to use the attempted coup. But I don't agree with that. You can discuss later on in that. Right. They have to abolish it anyway, because the assembly was controlled by the opposition, I think. In Burma is not the case. Burma is total control by the regime. In all 3 coups, almost total control. Almost total control. So basically, the 50 countries recognizing the Guaido government came to naught. So Kelsen was right here. And incidentally, before I go to Burma in 2 minutes, the Kelsen was criticized by the Pakistani Supreme Court in the 19, and luckily they wrote in English. They wrote in English, and it's called Jalili versus the government of Punjab. And he said that Kelsen is not universal, Kelsen is not correct. And in about 40, I don't read all, about 40 pages in English. And on 20th April 1972, that is the date I remember, Nevin nominally resigned from the army. The Burmese leader, he resigned from the army, but he still controlled Revolutionary Council chairman and Socialist Program Party chairman, etc. So Kelsen died almost a year later. I checked on the 19 April 1973. So he must have
Disappointment.
Yeah.
no, he died a year later after the Pakistani Supreme, and he was quite strongly criticized. We don't agree with Kelsen. It's not universal. It's not even half universal, something like that. And they cited Quranic passages of the illegitimacy of the previous Pakistani regime of Ayub Khan, because the orders issued by Ayub Khan is invalid. That's the petitioner request. And the Supreme Court unanimously, the Pakistani Supreme Court unanimously agreed to it. And it almost superseded the earlier 19 state versus Dosso, 1958 ruling. That is the earlier coup by the Ayub Khan regime. And they said that there is a change of order, change of regime, change of groom norm, I think, change of groom norm in Pakistan, and they accepted the Ayub Khan's order. That is, even after Ayub Khan was released, during the time of Ayub Khan regime. So I did not find the 1972 ruling, Jalini versus the state of Punjab, overruling the state versus Dosso of 1958. But they rejected the argument, accepted in the Kelsenite argument, accepted in state versus Dosso. Now, from 2019 to 2023, Venezuela, and now Pakistan, this is not on the slide, to Burma 1962. This is the chairman of the rascal, General Nevin, around the time or before the coup. On the way, my cousin drove me here, who lives in Brisbane, and we were discussing that his biography by Robert Taylor. I told Charles that when I remember telling Charles that when my thesis is submitted for examiners, please avoid Robert Taylor because he's a pro-regime scholar. And another is the late Michael Andre, who says that the 62 owned Burma, outrageously he wrote that Burma did not achieve independence in 1948 from the British. It only achieved independence in 1962 when the military took takeover. And even Lewin did not officially claim that. So he's more Malay than the Malay, more white than the white, this Michael Andre. He's dead now. And basically, I was discussing on the car that even Taylor mentioned that Lewin used to go to, he mentioned the name to Vienna, time like twice a year for psychiatric checkup. And Taylor even mentioned the psychiatrist's name in Vienna. So I don't know whether and my cousin and her husband says that not only Lewin, the current leader, also have two, apart from the ordinary physicians, they have two consultants. One is the psychiatrist. Second is the astrologer. Yes, the Burmese astrologer. So they have that. So he took over in a coup, and within days, this is his new photo. This is his 1997. No, this is pre-1962. This is 1997 or 1990. He's a very lucky man. When I read the titles of Marco's biography about, I don't read the book, but from the titles, America's Why, blah, 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 it seems very critical. But Nevin is, I told Taylor himself, I told that, he said that he started it. You don't like my book, isn't it? He said that. Come on, he said that, come on. I said, your book is indulgent. And he said that you lawyers are very moralistic, something to that effect. I said, no, I'm not a lawyer. Very moral. I don't like lawyers. One of my articles, which Charles has seen, is Woe unto Ye Lawyers, Free Royal Orders concerning pleaders in 17th century grammar. So this Nevin, when he took over, he arrested dozens of persons. A few were released the next day, but the Chief Justice, which I mentioned just now, Union Thing, he was arrested. He served as Burma's third Chief Justice for 4.5 years, 1957, July 22nd to 31st March noon, 1962. And he was about to retire in 26 June 1962, the 30th anniversary of his marriage to another first woman Burmese barrister. That's what his nephew in Canberra now, a retired pediatrician, told me. But then Nevin arrested him at 2 a.m. in the morning, and he told me that, he himself told me that, let me call the Inspector General of Police. And the one arresting officer ran back to his boss, and the boss himself came back. This is a coup. Don't do any more things. We have all cut the telephone lines. So, but another Chisman quoted another associate, where's the warrant? The Chief Justice, he said that this is a coup, you don't need a warrant to arrest him. So this is what he done. The Chief Justice was the longest. The president was to finish his tenure on 11 March 1962, but he was detained for 5.5 years. Prime Minister Unu, who tried to rebel against Nevin, was detained for 4 years and 10 months, and Union Thing, the Chief Justice, was 6 years. So he took longest. Parliament was abolished by decree the next day, on 3 March 1962. Abolished the Supreme Court and High Courts within 3 weeks. But some people don't know that Nevin never officially issued a decree announcing either the abolition of the 1947 Constitution or even suspending the 1947 Constitution. There was no attempt to justify or even abolish or suspend the 19, but it died a natural death. It died a natural death, or unnatural death, I should say. But I remember looking at the old newspaper, within days, I don't remember Australia, but Australia also recognized. United States, United Kingdom, India, People's Republic of China issued formal statements recognizing the new regime. Formal statements. So Estrada announced it in 1930, the Estrada Doctrine. But in 1962, most of the Estrada Doctrine was not followed by most countries. As far as Burma is concerned, I do not know about other coups in Thailand, neighboring Thailand, in Pakistan. I don't know whether there were statements by other governments issuing new recognition or not. But the Burmese government issued recognition of the Mao Zedong government within weeks, if not days, of the Mao Zedong announcement of the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Now, Australia, from what I've read, is no problem as such regarding recognition or non-recognition, except that someone told me, I can't remember, the then Governor General Sir John Casey, I can't remember, in the 60s, tried to raise the issue diplomatically or otherwise about the arrest of the Chief Justice, Union Thing, especially because they may have known each other. Because Union Thing, he told me he visited Australia around 1960, 2 years before the coup, and he was invited, he appeared with not Chief Justice as yet, Sir Garfield Bowick, on an Australian television program, maybe black and white TV at that time. And when I came to Australia initially to study first at Monash University, I had a letter of introduction from Union Thing to Sir Garfield Bowick. So I went and see Sir Garfield, and And U Minh Teng wrote me back then. So Galfi wrote to U Minh Teng through the diplomat pouch, I think. Oh, a very intelligent young man. Can your mentee come and see me? That's what he said. And U Minh Teng said to me, you speak respectfully in Burmese. You speak respectfully to the Chief Justice. So I said, sir, you didn't mind. But when I came to meet the late Professor William Mantry, who was then taught jurisprudence, theories of justice, okay? And I said, sir, 3-4 times, and William Mantry said, it's not the custom anymore to say sir. So I remember that even when I met in 1991, I still call him sir. He gave a talk on does international law matter. So the Fijian coup of 1987, from what I recall reading on the internet, that Australia issued an announcement that we won't recognize the new Fijian regime, but the Fijian regime survived. And in 1988, January, not 1988, Australia said that it too would adopt the Estrada Doctrine. And this has repercussions in Burma because in 1992, I'm hopefully touch wood, I'm going to meet the former Australian ambassador to Burma, Christopher Lam in Melbourne. He invited me to attend the lecture by Mimi Winberg, the Burmese American colonel in the Air Force, and he's talking. So my cousin warned me, be careful of not. They are looking for both the opposition here in Australia. NUG, the opposition has an office, not recognition, has an office in Canberra, has an office at the National Unity Government outside, has an office, but it's not recognition by the Australian government. Right? So be careful. So I must tell Chris Lam not to take photos with, especially me. I'm a Facebook junkie, so I put lots of things like that. So United States adopted the Estrada Doctrine in 1980. Britain also adopted the Estrada. I think they made an official issue. Australia was late, only in January 1988, and that is probably due to the Fiji fiasco, because the regime, I forgot the name, Rambuka, I think, Rambuka, continued, notwithstanding of official announcement that we will not recognize it. So Australia also followed in 1988, and Christopher Lam said, why are you representing Australia? Why are you recognizing the new regime? I think I saw him 25 years ago on TV, and he said that we don't recognize new governments. That is, we don't formally issue recognition or non-recognition. We only recognize new states. I think that's what Christopher Lam replied in that regard. So, but in September 1988, after a 40-day failed uprising, I've written an article in English published in the Manly University magazine. Initially, at that time, half democratic Global New Light of Myanmar agreed to publish my article comparing the Filipino and the Burmese uprising, but later on they didn't. So I wrote in the Manly University magazine in English, comparing within 3 days, a much lesser dictator Marcos was overthrown. And, oh yes, Manila Times published an edited version, And Burma, after 40 days, and lots of deaths, there are very few deaths in that. And I remember seeing in Manly, on TV, that the crowd entered Marcos' palace, and they said that the crowd cannot believe that he is really gone within 3 days. Here, after 40 days, from March 1988 to September 1988, I cannot believe that they are still there. And they are in even more forceful, ruthless regime compared to Slok. But they are good. There are some good points or bad points comparatively. And this is the issue. There were no statements, as far as I can discern, for any country, stating that we recognize or we don't recognize. Estrada has taken over again. And basically, the Malaysian, I met him in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysian ambassador to Burma, he arrived in July during July of 1988, during the crisis. So there were a change of at least nominal change of regime. Ne Win retired, and then the butcher Singh Nguyen take over, and then the Dr. Mama, I mentioned him a couple of times in my thesis, and the examiner, the late Professor Melford Spiro said that my main criticism of the thesis is that its redundancy, especially in its treatment of the work of late Dr. Mama, but immediate edit, which is understandable in a publication of previously published articles. So Dr. Mama became president for 28 or maybe 3 weeks. And finally, the regime, under orders of Ne Win, take over. And no government, unlike 1962, issued either recognition or non-recognition in that regard. But in 1991, Aung San Suu Kyi got the Nobel Peace Prize. I rang the editor of the New Straits Times saying that, why are you not writing the first Asian woman to get a Nobel Peace Prize? And he said, we follow the government. Later on, when the 1992, the Rohingya has been going crisis, they issued, if not condemnation, they wrote article criticizing the then Burmese regime, the New Straits Times editorial in English. And I said, why are you writing only now? And the editor said, we follow the government. We follow the government. So the ambassador showed me a cartoon because Malaysian government officially criticized then Burmese regime, and the Malaysian ambassador who presented his credentials to the then Somang, the regime chief, in October 1988, 1 month after takeover. So they waited a while to see how things go. And the cartoon said in Burmese, and he had a cutting, who is the very first government which recognized the Royal Army, the neat translation, Royal Army of Burma. Not really King's Army, but a glorified term. Of course, it is Malaysia, and the first ambassador is Salihuddin bin Abdullah. So he had that cartoon. So in a sense, by presenting credentials, there is no need to officially state that there is or is not. It is a recognition. And Christopher Lamb also evaded the issue. I looked at the All in the Family, a sitcom, American comedy sitcom, and he said that you are, Archie Bunker was scolding his wife Edith Bunker, saying that you are involving the issue. In fact, he meant you are evading. So Australia, Christopher Lamb evaded the issue that we don't recognize new government. We only recognize new states. So I remember, I may mention, if I have a chance to meet him, which I hope I would in the next several days, I'll mention it. Yes, I think this is mentioned. Because in a sense, Kelson rules affected that. In some, notwithstanding the Pakistani Supreme Court, unlike Pakistan, even unlike Fiji, where and also Uganda, or I can't remember, another state, note that Jalini versus the state of Punjab by the Pakistani Supreme Court in 1972 was not directed against the then regime. It was Ali Bhutto, sort of semi-civilian regime at that time after the Bangladesh crisis. It was the previous Ayub Khan regime from 1969 to Yahya Khan, not Ayub Khan, Yahya Khan, 1969 to 1971. And the regime collapsed after the Bangladesh crisis. So they were ruling, the Pakistani Supreme Court in 1972 was ruling about the previous regime, the illegality of one detention order of the previous regime. But in 1958, it was the Ayub Khan regime. But even then, Pakistan is much advanced than Burma in rule of law, so to speak, because they can challenge the Supreme Court. They can challenge the Ayub Khan regime legality before the Supreme Court in 1958, and the Supreme Court says no, it is a revolutionary order, and they may or may not have cited Kelson to justify their ruling. So Estrada, in Burma, Estrada rules in a sense, because most countries recognize. Even my cousin 2 days ago was saying that no one recognized the regime. I said, psychologically in your mind. But no, actually, he said, but I didn't try to, she's a medical doctor. I didn't try to argue or explain to her. The recognition is there. Facebook people wrote that no one recognized this regime. That is wrong. That is not correct, basically. So that's what I see. But very briefly, United States also did not adhere to Estrada, even though like UK, they adopted the Estrada doctrine in that. In fact, they don't use the word Estrada, but I think what Estrada laid down in 1930, basically. After the 21 August 1991 coup against Gorbachev by the Soviet, some say right wing, and because they are conservative in the sense of the Soviet context, so they said right wing attempted, that is the attempted coup, not the Burmese coup, that's the attempted coup, and it failed within 2 or 3 days. It failed within 2 or 3 days, and George H.W. Bush, I remember seeing on TV or on newspaper that we will not recognize the new brief 3-day regime. I don't know whether it helped, but of course it collapsed within 3 days. 3 days, and therefore Bush Senior also did not adhere to it. Yes, it can't move because the 1991 coup failed, and Fiji coup of 1987 succeeded in a sense. And there are further developments in Fiji, which I won't go through because of that. And basically, the Prasad case, where the High Court of Fiji, all by foreigners, I mean, Big Court of Fiji, all by foreigners at that time, says that the then regime of, I forgot the name, was illegal. And the whole new elections, but the same, I forgot, Karasi, a civilian, Karasi was illegal. That's the first time in history where apparently a court says that the current regime is illegal. Pakistan was the previous regime. Jalini case was the previous regime. So Burmese coup, Estrada or not Estrada, Kelsen or no Kelsen, it has succeeded basically. Now, thank you for the patient. I will go to part 2, and this is
we have some time for questions. So
yes, please do. Sorry.
Well, do you want to make a few points about that? Do you want to sort of say more, or we ask questions? Do you want us to give us another 5 minutes? And
Yes, please.
Yeah, if you want. Do you want to continue for 5 minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
If you have no question, I will continue.
Oh, I see that, because I was wondering.
For the first part.
Maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, 5 minutes, if we can do 5 minutes for the part 2.
Yes.
And then we'll questions about the life.
Okay.
If that's okay, thank you.
So 5 minutes rest right now. Is that what?
No, 5 minutes on part 2. Can you?
5 minutes on part 2.
Yeah.
I will try to do that as
Sorry,
soon as
yeah.
possible. Okay. Thank you.
Because it's very interesting. I think there are probably quite a few questions.
Yes. Okay. I won't go through rule of. I think most jurisprudence will be familiar with rule of recognition. Some say the problematic, but I won't go with that. This was first introduced apparently by Hart in 1961. Revised version was 1994. It's not recognition of new states or governments. It's partly internal, but I think what is the rule of recognition in England? Queen in Parliament, and that's Hart, I think, summarize the thing. Now, I won't repeat because of the 5 minutes. I won't repeat. The rule of recognition is generally to test the existence of validity of legal system, also outside as well as internally. I think basically, to cut it short, he said that for entities or things to be recognized as laws, officials within the system have to generally implement it. If these officials do not need to approve them, they can, in their mind, or even at times, may not fully implement. But if it is generally most of the officials, executive, police, judges, and others, implement it, then it fits in with the rule of recognition, and the verifiability of the legal system and flaws can be made. Now, basically, Hart acknowledged that his rule of recognition, according to Hart, in the 58 famous Harvard Law Review article, basically Hart says that the Nazi regime was bad. It was immoral. He readily acknowledged that, but because the two laws made in the regime, the 1934 and 1938 laws protecting the Third Reich, when in accordance with the rule of recognition, they are laws. They are bad, but they are laws. That's what I understand it to be. And Fuller says that they are so immoral that they are not laws at all. So in a sense, Fuller followed Aquinas, I think, even though I could not remember Fuller citing Thomas Aquinas in his article, but from 1958 to 88, 1968, there is a rule by the West German Constitutional Court that the Nazi laws of 1940, which invalidated which stripped German Jews who left Germany of German nationality, and they cannot have access to their property, including safe deposit boxes they left in German Nazi banks, is invalid from the very start. Invalid from 1940. They ruled in 1968. Similarly, in the Berlin Wall case, I went to the German embassy to ask for translation because at that time I didn't write anything on it. The 1822 West German Border Guard law, which allows in extreme circumstances to shoot those who cross the border wall, is unconstitutional, is invalid from the very start. The West German Unified Court says there. So in this case, Fuller over Hart, both the 1968 decision and the 1992 or 1993 decision. As far as the rule of recognition is concerned, you may have heard of the CDM. Oh, even semi-literate in Burmese, people know CDM, Civil Disobedience Movement, PDF, People's Defense Forces, and still, from going decades by MI, military intelligence. They all know, even illiterate Burmese even will know these three terms anyway. So basically, the CDM is done by 20% or less of academics. They don't go to war. And one of my junior colleagues in Manly, now she's in Yangon University Law Department. She went CDM for about 3 or 4 months, but she joined again by working for the regime, so to speak. So the least CDM is the judges in all levels. And in the Supreme Court, within days, May Online sacked all the NLD appointees. This time he didn't even refer to the Constitution. Sometimes when he can refer to the 2008 Constitution. So basically, many judges implemented the regime. Many judges sentenced to death to close, not very close, middle-ranking allies of Aung San Suu Kyi. They were allowed to make by video link, and the next day, without telling, they execute them. And they don't even let their parents or wives or family access to their bodies. So this is implemented by 95% or more of the judges, the regime. So basically, even if they don't like them, so it meets the hard criteria. Yes, that's what I say. Join the review. Yes, only 2% maybe or less of judges at all levels. And there's right now the former Chief Justice, 12.5 years, he's a military man anyway. He was allowed to retire, even though he can serve until 70 because of ill health. And another military officer replaced him as chief less than 2 weeks, 10 days ago. So yes, that I mentioned that NLD appointed, they just removed. There are separate 9 members of the Constitution, including one of my classmates. He, including with 7 others, were sacked. And they would have been obedient when anyway, they were not there. Only one left, and 8 new appointees were made. All the heads, basically. Fuller was applied by 2 German courts, 1968 and 1993. Hart and Kelsen with a vengeance applied the Burmese situation. Both are based on both Estrada and Hartian perspectives. Is only a pessimistic or realistic can be made. This is my last slide, I think. As far as Burmese political matters are concerned, I am almost an incurable pessimist. Even with the United States, I only hope that 84% certainty that Hillary Clinton will win. New York Times, hours before the election wrote.
Yeah.
In 2016, they no longer make a prediction or poll or whatever. So I have been really disappointed in pessimism, in my pessimism. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I can start.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for that. I've visited Burma, but 20 years ago, as part of the Australian government human rights training,
Yes,
which
yes.
happened. Yeah, I do wonder, what happened to the people involved in that. In response, there's a difference, surely, between recognition of a government, which is a political.
Yes.
I mean, there's a difference between recognition of a state, recognition of
Yes,
a government,
yes.
also recognition of the takeover of a state by another state, such
Yes.
as
Yes.
East Timor,
Yes, yes.
which was a different
And
thing.
even belligerency, it used to be
Yeah.
a recognition of belligerency, yes.
Yeah, when you've been talking about revolutions, it's largely been an internal revolution.
Yes, yes.
So there's a difference between that and then what you were talking about at the end, which is kind of recognition of actual laws of horrible governments.
Mm.
And I guess I just wanted to respond with regard to the East German case, because, I mean, okay, well, maybe to compare, I'm not an expert on the, I don't know much about the decision about the Nazi laws, but I'm guessing that the Nazis actually wrote in the law, it was quite explicit in the law that the Jews, the German Jews are stripped of their nationality and their property. And in order to interpret that any other way, I mean, leave aside the fact that if you interpret it another way, you probably get killed. But if you interpret it in any other, like, that's what it means. So it's either valid or invalid, but that's what it means.
Yes.
Whereas in the East German case, that case was actually appealed by the East German border guard, the head of them. That was appealed to the Human Rights Committee.
Sorry.
The head of the East German border guards, who was therefore found guilty of murder, by United Germany.
Yes.
He took a case to the UN human rights bodies, claiming that he was a victim of retrospective criminal law. That at the time he did at the time he authorised the shootings, it was legal, and then it was retrospectively illegal.
Yes.
And the Human Rights Committee decided against him, but on the basis that if you and pretty allegedly on a very similar basis to the German Federal Court, which was that if you actually looked at East German law at what it said, the murders were the shootings were illegal. So I guess the argument was there's law being interpreted, perhaps, certainly don't want to defend the Nazis, but in a way that's what it says, that's what the law says. Whereas there was a way around it in East Germany. That I suppose what both the Human Rights Committee and the German court were saying is that, look, the law of East Germany in fact prohibited these shootings. It was just being interpreted by the border guards and presumably by the East German judiciary in bad faith.
Yes.
So is there a difference there? I mean, if you simply, I mean, why are they interpreting in bad faith? Because they could get in trouble if not. And in fact, secretly, the East Germans did want to shoot people for climbing the Berlin Wall.
Yes.
But they just, according to this case, and this is all I know about it, didn't have the audacity to actually write that in the law. To actually say it is a criminal offence for which you can be shot if you actually cross the border.
Yes, thank you. I was referring, there are quite a few, this border guard cases. I was referring to the two 20 and 21-year-old then East German border guards who apparently shot in the Air Force and then aimed at the lake, but they shot 54 times or whatever, but hit only once or twice the lake, and the man fell down. And these were the true prosecutors of the East German border guard. The Berlin Provisional Code says that shooting 54 times is unproportional.
Yeah.
So that's why, but basically it only hit once or twice. And they shot at the lakes only. That's one thing. But basically, when both the prosecutor and the defendants appeal, and they say that Berlin Provisional Code misinterpreted because there is nothing in the 1982 East German border guard laws about proportionality. He said that they acted according to 82 German law, and they would have no defense unless we decide, and they did decide, that this law is invalid from the start. So both use retrospectively change it. That's what I was from. Of course, there are differences in each cases. Yes, thank you.
Maybe Greg has a question.
Oh, yes, sorry, yes.
Oh,
Yes, sorry, do you have any questions? Sorry.
Yes, I
Yes,
have a question of the Professor. So thanks for the great talk. I wonder if there's any body of law in relation to elections that are stolen as opposed to coups. And I won't talk about the USA because it wasn't really a stolen election, but you do have Belarus, South Sudan, even Kenya, I think, where there've been contested elections and allegations that the 1% margin should have been the other way. So is there any body of law about states not recognising elected governments because of electoral fraud?
can you translate?
Oh, sorry, because that if in fact an election is not, the government, that the military has taken over, is the classic sort of coup d'etat.
Yeah.
What about if somebody steals the election and gets into power because of stealing election rather than killing some people?
Through fraud.
Through fraud rather than violence. Is there anything in the case law, or what do you think should happen?
I am not aware. The allegation by the current regime, Burmese regime, is that there was gross election, and most people, foreigners, all those things, locals, NGO, say that it is not true. If it is true, it was a referendum in 2000. My late mother and the whole bloc voted against, but the order was that there must be 93% vote for the same thing. 2014 election, the NLD did not participate, and all get land, so-called land, and that was the cheated election, 2015. But later on, Aung San Suu Kyi reversed herself, and she had no choice, and participated in the 2012, by-election, and 2015, they allowed, the current regime leader allowed, no worry about coup. He said on keeping, no worry. But 20, they said that we will allow only 5 years, I think. Then they said, I'm not sure whether the precedent of alleged election cheating and of takeover is the only one in Burma or not. And that is what I can say also, if I understand the question correctly. Yeah.
Yes, I think Greg's is asked, is there anything, and of course there's all these things, the question domestically and internationally. The interesting thing is Kelson, of course, speaks for both.
Yeah.
Hart only speaks for domestic.
Yes.
And of course, Kelson's by and large efficacious is his test, both in international law and in domestic law.
Yes.
Is his approach.
Yeah.
So so I think it's both can go.
Yes, thank you. Sorry if I don't fully understand or resolve your question.
No, I think we're.
No, that's right.
Susan.
So, Mike, just thinking about the Burmese constitution still allowed the Tatmadaw to have major control over pretty much everything, right? So it was, of course, it was a coup, and but it was also, they already had control over some of the very major functions of executive government, right?
Yes.
Because they had external defence and they had state, all of that.
Yes.
So in my mind, I was like, gosh, so it was sort of they took back the only bits they had given,
Yes,
but they didn't
Yes.
give
yes.
very much in the first
No,
place.
no, in the
So
first-
I think people often outside the country didn't understand that,
No.
the Tatmadaw was still in control the whole time.
In fact, it would have been still in control. Most people know that 25% representation in both union legislature and the state and divisional legislature. They know that the Tatmadaw can, but even both foreign scholars, Melissa Crouch from New South Wales and Andrew Harding from NUS, within days of the coup, they said that it was not according even to the 2008 because it was the majority of the National Security Council, which includes Aung San Suu Kyi and President Win must approve. They arrested them and there are only 4 or 5 left. And they said that this is the national we authorized. And it's only 1 year. And only one extension of 1 year is allowed. Maybe 6 months. So this is not even according to the 2008 constitution. It was not in accordance with that. And most people know about that, but the thing is the Chief Justice, the Supreme Court are all military. I don't think Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Malaysia, Singapore have such arrangements. And second thing is, almost even during the NLD power shared regime, military NLD power share. Military is the first, NLD is the second. Most of the permanent secretaries, 80% are ex-military or military, apart from the 3, and also previously, and most of the ambassadors and other things, most of the economic conglomerates are military. So it is a very Praetorian system, probably not even Fiji or Pakistan or Nigeria or even South American dictatorships can compete in the sense of that war.
But you can see from the perspective of international law in the sense of when you're thinking about who is able to say they're in a state control of territory.
Yes.
The Tatmadaw already had all of that. So,
Yes.
So, but I think there's a separate issue, which is also the way that the military then treated the citizens,
Yes,
the CDM. But also, I think when you say states can by proxy override the Estrada Doctrine because they present their academic credentials or they do business.
Yeah.
So we were very critical of the Australian defence diplomacy. So we recognised the Tatmadaw all the way through, even through the Rohingya crisis.
Yes.
Right up just after the coup, we were the only Western government that was still having defence diplomacy.
Yes. United States distance itself.
Yeah, everybody else, and we were still in them.
Yes.
It was pretty disgusting, actually. And it suited our allies because it was good to have one bad guy still in the tent kind of thing, having relations. So, we were kind of pariahs in that sense, but one that all our allies were pretty happy with. But then when the targeted sanctions started over the Rohingya, but also over the coup, you could say that's a kind of an attempt to de-recognise or muddy the recognition of it. Because, there's some very targeted sanctions against all those Tatmadaw leaders.
Yes.
And all sorts of non-travel and, very specific types of targeted sanctions. Down to reasonably junior Tatmadaw officers right up. So I think there's something like 300 now with targeted sanctions. So Penny Wong has decided to go in for the laser-like precision. So, I mean, in that sense, you've got a problematic, at least you've got some, states trying to problematise their recognition, if you know what I mean. But I think Myanmar is such it's such an incredibly, Emma and I were talking about ways that, perhaps the government in exile could work with the UN in some particular ways and what could be their ability to address the UN. There's a lot of precedent for that too. So there is some precedence around government in exile being able to do various things. Timor did a lot of that. There was a range of things. So I'm not sure if recognition is the complete answer to. It's not a binary in the sense that states can still use quite a lot of tactics to either undermine or support. So China's doing a huge amount of support, but Australia's trying to undermine through this type of sanctions. But generally speaking, I mean, I think our stance has been so up and down. We have, you know, I think the Estrada doctrine has really guided our actions. I don't think we've been very.
The thing that I say is that, but sorry, the thing is, who gets the keys to the embassy?
Yeah.
Who gets the who gets the seat in the United Nations?
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is that to say we recognise states, not regimes, I'm sorry, we do, because of those fundamentally practical things of what we actually do. And of course, I've always felt that with Kelson, looking at Kelson by and large efficacious, a country in this globalised world is not effective until it gets recognition. So it totally turns it around. And so that's what, that's what I always advocated. That's one of the three pillars of stopping coup d'etat. But I mean, it's something that not many people have that view. But then the thing is, not many people sort of confront the question of who gets the key. You talked about an office in New York, but sorry, here's the embassy, and we are deciding to say that you get the keys rather than you, which is their decision. So I think that I said it was a cop out at the time, and but of course,
But even then, as I say, you can have like parts of the state. So I don't think most Australians realise that our senior military was still, hobnobbing at a pretty intimate level with the senior military of the Tatmadaw right up until, well, very recently. So, there's different layers of state recognition. I think that's really interesting.
I've always tended to say that there's, when it comes to what's coup d'etat, some people sort of see it as military, that's technical. But for me, it's one part of the state uses the powers that are given to them by the state to take over the powers of others. And so the question is, what's a coup d'etat typically is, and one part of it is the military, who of course the thing is that are given power in order to defend the country internationally doing. So of course there's a special form of obloquy for those who are given empowered to help somebody who doesn't, so teachers who abuse their students, so forth, and generals who do that. But there are other forms of coup d'etat, and we quite often see the thing is that the executive government sacks and stacks the court. And you see that in Malaysia. Now, that to me is a coup d'etat within that general.
So you can repeat about the Malaysia thing? Sorry.
If in fact, now, I think what Malaysia said, that if in fact the thing is that the executive decides to get rid of the Supreme Court, send the police in or whatever they do, then in that case, that is actually a form of coup d'etat. It's just, it's not the typical one, which was but although it's become more common, because of the guy called Lord Halperin who worked for, was the only person who's been simultaneously on the National Security Council of the United States and also president of the American Civil Liberties Union. And he said he hates coup. But he calls it an auto coup. But in fact, I think the whole point is that that it's not just military, especially these days when it's incredibly common to actually try and manufacture a sort of what looks like a popular uprising, which the generals can then sort of come in and spin up in the Philippines. Anyway, sorry.
Johnson, just wondering if we could maybe
Yes.
formally wrap up and give everyone a statement.
Thank you. Sorry, Mary.
Sorry, no, it's okay.
No, the thing is that we'll thank those who've come here.
Thank you for coming.
And we can continue with questions and answers informally on this for the next about 10 or 15 minutes. But thank you very much, and thanks for reminding me of my responsibility.
That's all right.
Anyway, does anyone else have questions? Sorry.